مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. إنه تقليد أميركي عظيم، دعم سياسة ما عندما تكون ذات شعبية، ولكن انتقادها عندما لا تبدو على قدر كبير من الجاذبية. على مدار العقد الماضي لم يكن لأي من مواضيع السياسة الخارجية الأمريكية شعبية بقدر الدعوة إلا إنهاء الحروب الأبدية. كانت تلك الدعوة أحد المواضيع المحورية للسياسة الخارجية للرئيس ترامب، وشكلت مبدأ بارزا ضمن برنامج الحزب الديمقراطي في 2020. فهل تعتقدون أن كل من في الحياة العامة سيشيد بقرار الرئيس بايدن بسحب كل الجنود الأمريكيين من أفغانستان وإنهاء التدخل الأمريكي في الحرب عمرها 20 عاما؟ ستكونون مخطئين إن فعلتم. مع المشاهد الفوضوية للمواطنين الأفغان الخائفين على حياتهم وتعلقهم بالطائرات الأمريكية، وهي تقلع من مطار كابول، يهاجم أعضاء مجلس الشيوخ وأعضاء الكونغرس من كلا الحزبين الرئيس بايدن. يقول البعض إنهم يعارضون قرار الرحيل عن أفغانستان، ويقول آخرون إنهم يعارضون الطريقة التي رحلت بها أمريكا. عند الأخذ بكل هذا في الاعتبار تشكل هذه أصعب أزمة من أزمات السياسة الخارجية أمام الإدارة الجديدة لمناقشة سياسات انسحاب أمريكا من أفغانستان. يسرني أن أرحب بالصحفيتين من أكثر الصحفيين السياسيين احتراما في واشنطن، وهما سارة فارس وجيسيكا تايلور. It's a familiar scene. American, what looks like debacle abroad, and already the calls for congressional inquiries here at home. We're seeing congressmen of both parties, Democrats and Republicans, criticizing aspects of President Biden's decision to withdraw from Afghanistan, some the basic principle, some the execution and implementation, but politics is all over it. And to discuss the political implications here in Washington of what is happening in Afghanistan, I'm delighted to welcome Sarah Ferris and Jessica Taylor. Thank you very much for joining me today. So before the actual 11 days of withdrawal and collapse, can you sketch out for me basically where the two political parties and the two main leaders of the parties, especially on Capitol Hill, were on Afghanistan? Should we stay? Should we leave? When? How? That sort of thing. Jessica?
Well, you do have, President Trump had brokered this deal with the Taliban, which the fact that he was negotiating with them was controversial, certainly among Democrats. But I think there was a feeling, at least among both parties, that this was a war that has taken 20 years. I was in high school when we first went to Afghanistan. All of my adult life, we have been there. There are people that are serving over there that weren't even born when this war started. So I think there was support for, especially among Democrats. That's been sort of the, we saw that talk about during the primaries and things. This has been sort of the more, anti-war wing. And especially since it was, George W. Bush that started this war. And of course, we've been through now 2 Democratic presidents and 2 Republican presidents where this has endured. So, Biden really, when he announced that he was doing this in April, it was sort of met with big acclaim. And I think there's some Republicans that certainly do support the withdrawal as well, but are sort of now understandably pointing fingers and wanting to know sort of what went wrong. I think there was sort of a sense, even among when President Trump proposed it, that there was not sort of a concrete plan going forward. And I think that's sort of been the question. But I think, the thing that certainly the White House is pushing now is that and I think you're seeing some, sort of Biden allies echoing this too, is that, that the Afghan army was sort of, had some corruption and issues, and that they were sort of never going to be able to defend themselves without American presence. And so where is our philosophy in the world of being, of being there indefinitely or not? And I mean, Trump had a America First policy. So that was, many of his supporters did not support being there either, because it was, what are we doing there necessarily? So it's sort of been, I would say, because the Republican Party has not been had a cohesive policy under Trump, it's sort of evolved over the past few years. And it's just that there's no, I wouldn't say there's a, uniformity among Democrats too, because we are certainly seeing some moderate Democrats, especially some that served in Iraq and or Afghanistan, that we're seeing sort of question what has gone on. Jason Crow in Colorado, Seth Moulton in Massachusetts. So I wouldn't say that there's sort of one cohesive view necessarily.
So Sarah, the call to end forever wars got a standing ovation at State of the Union addresses, and was in both parties' political platforms when the Republicans had a political platform. Were there voices before all this who stood up and said, no, that's not a good idea?
So the number of folks who have been saying it's time to end these endless wars. I mean, as Jessica was saying, we saw a lot more of the Republican Party unify behind this message after President Trump brought this out in 2015, 2016. He really rallied the base behind it. It became okay to be a Republican and say that. In the Democratic Party, of course, progressives have been saying this for years. There's been several vocal progressives, including Barbara Lee, the only person in Congress who voted against beginning this war in 2001. She's no longer the only Democrat in the party, the only member of Congress who has been saying it's a bad idea. So she has a lot more folks behind her on this. I would say the majority of the Democratic Party was feeling like this. Of course, as Jessica was saying, there's a lot of these Afghanistan war veterans serving in Congress. They have been warning for years and years. Many of them have been really pushing back against leaders of their own party who have said it is time to pull out. They've questioned what is the strategy when we start to leave. They've questioned the strategy for getting folks out, getting U.S. allies out, getting U.S. citizens out. And you can look back even 7 months ago, they were writing letters to the Biden administration saying, we don't see a clear plan on this. And they were sounding the alarm then. Many of them have been speaking out now. And of course, Biden is their president. They want to be careful about how critical they are of him. But many of them are not mincing words. And they're really saying this was mishandled and that they should have seen the warnings on this. So while the majority of Democrats would have agreed with Biden on his statement on the need to get out of there, the need to end these wars, of course, they're caught in a bind with how things ended up. And it really was a small minority of lawmakers who were sounding the alarm on this.
So you referred to the Afghan war veterans warning about the implementation of the withdrawal. I want to ask for a moment about progressives in the Democratic Party. One would think in theory that they would be on the horns of a dilemma, seeing millions and millions of women and girls being, thrown out of school back into almost medieval servitude from the hopeful moment of that they enjoyed over the last number of years. But are progressives all of one voice in terms of supporting the decision to withdraw? Jessica?
I'm not sure we have heard sort of a unified voice on that either necessarily. But certainly they are condemning the actions of the Taliban and supporting, relocation of refugees into the country, and certainly interpreters and things, that people that worked with us over there, that would make them certainly more susceptible and vulnerable to Taliban attacks. But I think it sort of goes back to what Sarah said. This was sort of a progressive rallying cry from the beginning, that, Barbara Lee is no longer alone on this. And I do think it sort of put them in a quandary, because you have these really damaging images. And, oftentimes it's the progressives that really want us to be more involved humanitarily and different things, but at the same time, not wanting troops to be there. So I think I'm not sure that it's an easy sort of solution for them to come to. And I think what we're left with is that there are no easy solutions here. There was no easy withdrawal. There were going to be consequences, this was not going to go according to plan. And as Sarah said, a lot of people sort of sounding the alarm early on, and there's real questions now of whether the State Department, the Department of Defense, and whether the White House heeded those calls. So I think, right now, sort of the emphasis seems to be on, getting these Afghans out of the country, getting Americans out of the country, and getting them back home. And, are there humanitarian things that we can do there? But I do think there would be a hesitancy still to have a prolonged military presence there necessarily.
And so, Sarah, are we hearing anything special from that wing of the party? Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, et cetera?
Well, you mentioned Ilhan Omar, and that's a really interesting example because, of course, she is a refugee. She came from the failed state of Somalia. She has seen firsthand the devastation caused when a government collapses, and she has been very careful in what she's been saying. Of course, the focus right now for her and for everyone else on Capitol Hill basically is getting these people out of there as quickly as possible, making sure they can have a safe arrival here in the United States. That's what members of Congress, progressives like Ilhan Omar, are really focusing on. But as Jessica alluded to, there is not really the answer to what happens next and what should the U.S. role be. And going back to maybe this wasn't exactly how this should have happened. And if we were trying to end endless wars, I mean, there's going to be political consequences of that do affect millions of women and girls. So we are this is obviously an early developing situation. We haven't the congressional response so far has been the paperwork side of things, getting folks out, getting these visas secured. But there's going to be a lot of time to come in these hearings as Republicans are already pledging to have their own investigations if they retake the House next year. So this is going to be something that is dug into very deeply. Republicans see political weakness here on Democrats, and they'll certainly be seizing on the positions of people like Ilhan Omar, who have been very vocally calling for a pullout on this, but not really having an answer to the humanitarian crisis that we've seen.
After the break, we're going to come back to the question of Republican hearings in the event that there's a change. But I just want to follow up for a moment on the Barbara Lee point you made earlier. I mean, Barbara Lee was opposed to the original deployment in Afghanistan 20 years ago, using military force to go after al-Qaeda and sending troops. Are people actually saying that what has happened now validates the decision? It validates her view that we shouldn't have gone in 20 years ago to go after al-Qaeda?
Well, I think it's complicated, right? Because of course, the U.S. troops have been able to achieve certain things that members of Congress say was necessary over these 20 years. There's so much that has been done, but of course, leaving and the repercussions from this pretty botched rollout have made a lot of people in the party look to Barbara Lee even more than they have in the past and said, you really had this perceptive view on how this was going to go down. And Lee is a really interesting character. She comes from a military family. Her father was in the military. She was a army brat growing up and has been really vocal on this issue. She's been calling to cut the defense budget for many years, and she's certainly someone that folks have been looking to in the party, and now it's nobody really wants to play the hindsight game. It's all about looking forward to getting folks out and here into the U.S. But she's certainly someone who people are looking towards and saying maybe we should have listened back then.
All right, when we come back after the break, we're going to talk about whether and how Republicans can shift from inheriting the Donald Trump mantle of wanting to get out to going after the Biden administration for its decision to do what Donald Trump wasn't able to do. When we come back in just a moment. It is impossible not to be moved by the wrenching human saga that played out at Hamid Karzai International Airport in Kabul, as Afghans who had thrown their lot in with the Americans over the last 20 years saw their lives unravel, and with nothing left to lose, threw themselves onto departing U.S. military cargo planes in a vain effort to fly to freedom. It is in many ways a replay of what happened in Saigon 46 years ago. Those images, including the iconic scene of a helicopter taking off from the roof of the American embassy, were etched indelibly into theater history with one of the most moving and unforgettable operatic musicals of the last generation, Miss Saigon, a show I have seen 3 times here in America and in London. It is the story of an orphaned Vietnamese girl who escapes to a refugee camp in Thailand with her young son, born of a U.S. Marine, and their eventual tragic reunion. Eventually, I am sure, the Afghanistan saga will produce its own moving and unforgettable theater. But until then, watch Miss Saigon and imagine the Miss Kabul variation. Again, my guests today include Sarah Ferris. Sarah covers the House of Representatives for Politico, a multimedia platform that is all politics all the time. Her focus is the Democratic Caucus, a native of Newtown, Connecticut, where she is a 5th-generation dairy farmer. She was also a reporter for The Hill, The Washington Post, and The Houston Chronicle. Also joining us today is Jessica Taylor. Jessica is the Senate and Governor's editor for the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter. Before joining Cook, Taylor was a political reporter for National Public Radio, where she covered elections and breaking news, ranging from the White House to both chambers of Congress and statewide elections. A native of Tennessee in the American South, she was also a contributing author to the 2020 edition of the Almanac of American Politics and promoted to senior author for the 2022 edition, the first woman ever to hold that position. All right, Jessica, let me ask you about how Republicans are navigating this murky world where, on the one hand, President Trump was the champion of getting out of Afghanistan, but yet the opportunity to attack the Biden administration is too great to avoid. How are Republicans navigating this somewhat contradictory position?
I think they're sort of largely ignoring what Trump has said previously about it, or that he was planning to do this too, or just noting that, that they would have had a better plan. They would have had, would have had more support there, bringing people out first. And certainly, President Trump, since he left office, while he has sort of been deprived of his medium of choice of Twitter, since he has been banned from that, any political reporter can tell you that though he sends multiple press releases a day through his super PAC that are essentially tweets, sometimes they will be very, very short. So he has been very critical of Biden and sort of, I think for Republicans, it's trying to paint a picture of an inept president on foreign policy, especially, and sort of ignoring the fact that even with Trump, that we were not seen as, strong abroad. And Biden campaigned on trying to restore that sort of American perception abroad. And he was going to bring all of this experience, having served in the Senate for so many years, having been Senate Foreign Relations Committee chairman, been vice president. So,
Sarah, one hears talk already that for Republicans, this is a replay of a Benghazi moment, a moment that they can, gather the troops, do hearing after hearing after hearing, and occupy the headlines and cable news with investigations. First of all, was the Benghazi moment viewed as a success by Republicans? Is it really something they want to replicate? And are people really thinking that they're going to turn this into another gavel to gavel focus on the Biden administration?
Yeah, I think there's no question that Republicans think that they have this really prime opportunity to attack Democrats for all the reasons Jessica just outlined. I don't think there could be a worse political situation for Democrats right now, for all of the mismanaging and all of the ways that Biden himself has not handled this very well optically. So what Republicans are going to look to do now, they're going to cause as much noise as they can. Of course, they're in the minority in the House, so they don't have a lot of power. But right now, it's looking like the Republicans will be able to take back control of the House next year. The Democrats would have to have some really big things move in their favor for that to not happen.
All right, this is an ongoing story. I want to thank both of you, Sarah Ferris, Jessica Taylor, for helping explain the political and congressional angle of the Afghanistan saga. Thank you for joining us on Dakhel, Washington. President Biden's decision to withdraw fully and completely from Afghanistan, a decision which revealed the hollowness of the Afghan government and army and paved the way for the swift return to power of the Taliban, is the product of years of experience, leavened with intelligence, analysis, and input from a wide range of veteran policy officials. But at the heart of it, there is a triple wager. The president is essentially betting that before too long, the American people will remember that their soldiers are no longer in Kabul, Kandahar, Mazar-e-Sharif, and other Afghan cities. Not that many Afghans who threw their lot in with the Americans over the last 20 years are stuck in those very places with no way out. He is also wagering that the counterterrorism infrastructure built over the last 20 years, the massive government agencies, the airline regulations, the no-fly lists, the expertise of American drones, etc., will prevent a resurgent Al-Qaeda from executing new carnage against American citizens, especially on American soil. And he is wagering that the very real achievements of recent months, progress in the fight against COVID, improvements in the national economy, achievement of a national infrastructure bill, will outweigh the dismay and in some quarters the outrage over the apparent mishandling of the Afghan withdrawal, with all its human costs. Are these good bets? Are they likely to pay off? Well, the first and third bets are psychological. The outcome of the second bet will be borne out by whether or not we succeed in deterring and preventing another mass casualty attack, as we have done ever since 9/11. In terms of the psychological, my guess is that the president is on firm ground, that once the outrage dissipates, there is unlikely to be lasting damage to him or to his administration from the events in Kabul. Unless, of course, this turns out to be the first of a series of bungled policies, with bungling becoming the norm, not the exception. If you look back in time, the fall of Saigon, as embarrassing as it was, had no lasting impact on the Nixon administration or on Nixon's Republican Party. Richard Nixon resigned in disgrace for reasons totally unconnected to the Saigon fall. His successor, Gerald Ford, almost won the election in 1976, with his loss unrelated to Vietnam, and Nixon's party, the Republicans, won back the White House just one election later, in 1980, keeping it for the next 12 years. What does all this mean? Yes, foreign policy matters, but local politics matters more. And as Joe Biden seems to know, one never lost betting that Americans focus less on yesterday and more on tomorrow. بهذا نصل لنهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة، وخاصة حول أثر الانسحاب من أفغانستان على انتخابات أمريكا العام المقبل، أرجو أن تتواصلوا معي عبر تويتر على هاشتاغ Inside Washington أو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على @RobSatloff. سأراكم الأسبوع المقبل وإلى أن ألقاكم. شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.